They call it their ceasefire strategy. And tonight, several community groups and law enforcement agencies are calling it a success. Well, tonight, hundreds of people came out to see for themselves whether ceasefire is working in the battle against gang violence. News 10's Ann Fon joined in the search for answers.
I've been shot twice and stabbed several times.
Former gang member Ronald Montez has turned his life around.
Now I'm giving it back to make sure no other kids experience that type of behavior.
He heads up the California Gang Violence Prevention Service Agency and combats Sacramento's growing gang problem.
We have 5,174 validated gang members in the city of Sacramento.
Montez isn't the only one trying to curb gang violence.
We've seen this strategy work. We'd now like for law enforcement and also elected officials to make sure that this becomes a priority in our region.
Supporters say ceasefire helps reduce violence with weekly night walks as seen in these pictures. The ceasefire strategy also involves interventions with gang members.
The purpose of tonight's meeting is to celebrate the success of ceasefire.
Tonight, ceasefire advocates claim their efforts help reduce gang shootings among two targeted gangs by 70%. Sacramento police agree.
So they were in an actual war prior to, they had like 28 shootings in about 18 months prior to starting the program. That's why we focused on those two gangs, and obviously afterwards the evaluation showed that we dropped those shootings 70%.
The group also claimed its efforts help reduce violence citywide by more than 16%.
You know, we can't claim that it was all because of ceasefire, but I think that was a program we had going in the area that was outside of the norm of years past. So I think we had a positive effect.
And law enforcement went up.
Montez says more needs to be done to combat the problem, and it takes ex-gang members like himself.
The way you deal with this violence is you establish relationships with these people, right? You have to take the time to walk the streets, but you have to use ex-gang members or people from this specific hood or from another hood and these guys are familiar with, right?
Pretty impressive record. The Sacramento Police and Sheriff's Department say budget cuts and layoffs mean they need all the help they can get to battle the gang problem. So far, they say the joint effort involving police, churches, and the DA's office is working. The ceasefire effort has worked in 6 other cities around the country, including Boston.
Why did ACT? What were you seeing in the community that made you take a stand?
Well, ACT for the past 20 years has really been working in the Sacramento community citywide to really address issues, root causes of issues in the community, social ills. So around the time that we started thinking about ceasefire was ACT had actually been working with the collaborative of youth pastors that were trying to address a lot of the issues that were associated with the challenges that youth were facing in the city. So that stemmed from truancy in schools to violence to a number of other factors. And because one of those serious root causes of those issues was violence, we began researching and figuring out what are some of the solutions to a lot of these problems that were facing the youth at that time.
So what led you to choose the Boston ceasefire model? Was there something particular that stood out for you? And then what were the pros and cons of that model for Sacramento?
Well, I think we had to look at what was best for Sacramento. There was a number of other violence strategies out there, but we really felt that there was a need for there to be a carrot and stick approach, since so many of the issues that were facing youth were not just violence. It was a lack of opportunities, it was a lack of jobs, and the Boston model really gave us the opportunity to present those opportunities and those services to youth and not just be heavy street outreach, which a lot of the other models are really heavy on, is street outreach. But we really wanted this to be a life-changing sort of effort with youth, bringing them opportunities, bringing them jobs that were really going to change their lives.
So as a pastor of a church or a member of a church, how was it that you convinced your parishioners and your leadership team that you should be involved in this model?
Well, it was It was more personal for us because where our church is positioned at is right in the heart of where the crimes and gang activity occurs. And historically, the church has focused indoors and implemented the programs that they've implemented and really not aligned themselves with the city, with law enforcement, with the different partnerships that we've been able to align through ceasefire. And so we knew we had to act. We knew we had to be a part of what this work was doing because it brought the whole community together. It brought the congregation together. It brought the law enforcement. It brought the state agencies, and it brought community organizations together. So what we did, we began to engage our congregation on what the problem is in our community. Some of them didn't know. Some people may have commuted from different parts of the city, from different cities, and so some of them didn't know. But a huge group of our congregation was fully aware of the problems within our neighborhood. So we began to talk about the violence. We began to talk about what was going on, and then there was a defining moment that really brought home that we need to act, and we need to act now. And that was when a young lady got killed protecting her son at a barber shop. And at that moment, we got a charge from the mayor that, hey, he's wanting the faith community to act and to respond to this. And our way of responding to this was to go out, engage the community, and start the night walks. And the night walks are a time to where we begin to go out and listen to the concerns of the community, be in position when violent crimes happen, be in position at the time that is the most kind of trafficky time that people come outdoors. But in our community, they were afraid to come outdoors because of what was happening. So we targeted the night walks at those times to stop the violence and to engage the community, to empower the community, and to love upon the community.
So what have you seen from the community? What has their response been to your team?
Well, we went in with the approach of listening to the community and not with the approach of trying to tell them what the problems were. They already knew what the problems were. They knew that it was shootings. They knew it was drive-bys. They knew it was drug deals. They knew where they were. They knew how they were. And the church had typically had an approach of, in the past, going into the community that we didn't want to go with. And so we decided that we were going to go in listening to the community. And within the first month, we just said, okay, we're going to position ourselves in the community and just listen to the concerns, get the respect, get the street cred from the community. Once we did that, we began to establish a real authentic relationship with the people in the community, from the apartment complex residents to the apartment owners to the owners of businesses. And initially, there were crimes, there were still problems at the time of the night walk. But as time went on, as they began to see our consistency with not only one night walk a week, but 3 night walks a week, going on 3 different days a week. They began to see our commitment to them, our commitment to stopping the violence. And next thing you know, a year later, the violence has stopped. It was told to me a couple of months ago from one of our law enforcement personnel that during the hours and times that our night walk is going on, it's the safest time of the streets. There are actually lower and less dispatch calls during the times that we do the night walks in the streets in South Sacramento.
Awesome. So once you had identified ceasefire as a viable model, and because it's not a cookie cutter, you can take that and tailor it to specific cities. How did you go about identifying your partners? How did you know who needed to be at the table?
Well, through previous relationships, our ongoing relationship that ACT has had with different organizations in Sacramento, we first went to them. We knew that SETA had done some work with us previously on youth jobs. We knew we wanted to have a component that really provided jobs and opportunities for youth, so called them up. Just looking at the Boston model, we knew that there was all these other pieces, and just began kind of cold calling these organizations that we knew needed to be at the table and would have a stake in this program coming here and being successful.
So how was it that you were able to reach out to the police department and engage the police department, the mayor's office, probation, and those other partners that clearly had a stake as well in the violence reduction?
Well, I really think it had to do with relationships that we had already established in the community. So early on, we were working with a group that had previously worked with the police department and knew kind of the go-to guy within the department that would really have a heart for seeing this strategy come to Sacramento. So, so just kind of figuring out who were key people that we already knew would have a stake in this, and just started calling them. With the police department, we were very fortunate that they were on board from the jump. And we just went in and did presentations that kept drilling down that this is an evidence-based program that we know works. We have the faith community standing behind this, saying that they're willing to do their part to make it happen, and just continued that process of just calling, engaging folks that we knew would have a stake in this being successful.
So how did you begin then to identify roles and responsibilities, including that of the ongoing role and the importance of engaging the faith community?
Well, I think with the police department, they took the role of kind of overseeing the overall project management piece of this. SETA, they specialize in jobs and career training and job training, so it just was a nice fit that they would take on that piece. And then ACT's role has really been to coordinate the faith-based or community efforts of this whole initiative. So I think in the end, everyone fit in where their specialty, where their specialty was.
So did you go through a formal strategic planning process as you've rolled this out? Has that been something that you've done?
Well, I can't say that it was necessarily a strategic process. It just was a matter of gathering the right people together. Our affiliates in other cities, neighboring cities, were actually interested in this ceasefire effort at the time that it started. So we were able to take a group to really go and meet a lot of the technical assistant trainers that were helping those other cities develop this initiative. So, so by bringing them there and having them bought in and learn how it all works, it's very easy to come back to Sacramento and just start figuring out who else needs to be at the table and going from there.
So who was it that coordinated it, or initiated and then coordinated the call-in strategy? Was that something that ACT learned through working with the TA facilitators, or was that something that you developed on your own?
Well, we can both talk about it, but it was a model that was created in another city, another state, that we implemented here. We went through a series of workshops and training to get the different wording on what to say and what not to say, and then we began to identify who we needed to call in. And once we did that, it was through the work of law enforcement, probation, and getting the right people, which are the shot callers of different gangs, there at the right time, as well as getting the right community leaders. You want the right people speaking into these kids' life that will help motivate them, as well as you want the backing of the community there to say, hey, enough is enough. We are all standing together on the same page, asking you to stop the violence and supporting law enforcement if you decide to continue on and doing violent crimes in their decision and having to do their job. So it was a real collaborative effort of all of us coming together to identify the right people to bring to the table as far as the gang offenders, and then the right community leaders, the right personnel there to position everybody.
If you were to say someone was missing, or you're looking for this one other piece to complete your collaborative, who might that be?
Well, it was the sheriff department, and that's because violence doesn't just end at the city limits, but it does go into the county, and Sacramento's kind of weirdly placed where there's a lot of areas that are county, and then you go right across the street and then city. But if we don't have that law enforcement agency's support in this, then we're missing out on a different group of offenders who really need this opportunity to get on the right path. So we actually held an action in May where we asked for their support and commitment to being a part of this this strategy. So they have since made a commitment and are on board, and we're just figuring out how to get them in the fold.
Yeah, and may I just add to that question, to that comment, that this is not a cookie cut kind of recipe. It steadily can be added to and increased and developed. We were in a conversation a couple of days ago, and someone asked a question on if the school system is supporting, and how is their role supporting our efforts in the call-in. And then someone asked me another question: are prison guards involved in the call-in? And it just raised a great concern and thought to me that says, man, it would be great to have a school teacher motivating these kids that are invited to the call and saying, hey, we want to educate you. We want you back into the school system. Or then someone from the prison system saying, hey, this is what it's like in prison for 30 years or for 20 years. You don't want to go there. And so I guess the ingredients for the success that we have can steadily be added to as people take a stand and say, hey, I want to be a part of ceasefire. I want to be a part of changing our city. So we invite everybody to be a part of it.
So how is it that you have expanded the city walks? I know they started there in the South area. And how do you continue to keep the faith community engaged?
Well, because there was such a robust group of clergy in the South that started the night walks, it was very easy is not going to be the right word. We tapped that energy and just continue to bring it to the different communities that are now a part of it. So Oak Park and Del Paso Heights were on the list for this strategy to reach them soon after it started in South Sac. So we just tapped that energy of those clergy and just had them go to meet with clergy in those communities and just start telling the story of how this started, what are the successes, why this is so important for the churches to be involved. And then my role as the organizer and the coordinator of these efforts is to branch out, start engaging new clergy, find out their passions, whether this is something that aligns with those passions, and just getting them on board that way.
Do they go through any type of facilitated training other than informational, or is that something that they do in a progressive type fashion where first they get the introduction and then they do training, or how does that work?
So specifically for the night walks, we actually received training from Reverend Jeffrey Brown, who is one of the original pastors and the originator of the Boston 10-Point Coalition ceasefire. So we've brought him out here at least 4 or 5 times to train the clergy as a large group. But now that we have veterans like Pastor Les, who have been doing it for just about 2 years now, we tap their experience, and they are the ones who come into these other communities and are actually leading the training based on their experience.
So what would be the next area of the city that you start to initiate the night walks?
So we actually are in Del Paso Heights as well as Oak Park in South Sacramento. I think another area after that is Rancho Cordova. So knowing that the violence out there is spiking, we want to be able to just kind of be wherever the violence is happening. And if at all possible, let's just get the whole city involved with this effort.
So do you have a success story you can tell us about of a young person that participated in the call-ins, or someone whose parents you knew that said, hey, my child is out there? Can you tell us a success story?
We have a couple of success stories. I enjoy telling them too. The first one is just about when we first started this night walks in the South area. Initially, it was driven by a lot of our congregation members and partners within our churches. But as we began to get out there in the community started to support it in ways that they would actually go on our night walks with us. One family that we met in one of the apartment complexes have been living together for the last 8 years in one apartment complex. Their kids began to go on the night walk with us, and in turn the parents began to come come on the night walk with us. Well, we found out that they weren't married. They had just been living together and wanted to get married, couldn't afford to get married, didn't know how to get married. Well, we took that couple in. We held their wedding at our church. We paid for the wedding. We, got them their dress and their cakes and everything. And now that whole family is out there on the night walk with us every single week, engaging in the community. Another story that I just love to tell is about one of the young men that we targeted with the ceasefire and with the call-ins. And he began to change his life and wanted to be a part of changing the community. So he began to come on the night walk with us and work with the outreach workers. And he's still out there on the streets, on the curb, engaging in conversation, helping pulling people that he had influence with to change their lives the same way he's changing his lives. And so, it's a great testimonial story. It's many kids. It's many kids that have gotten jobs, that have gotten their GEDs, that just have gotten their lives together. Most of all, the greatest success story is in the area of high violence, shootings, gang activity. We've seen a tremendous drop in gang violence and shootings and kids dying. And for me, if we saved one life in that community, we made a difference, and we saved a lot of lives, and we're continuing to do that as we develop the ceasefire approach.
And we did receive a thank you letter from a mother whose child had attended the call-in and had since gotten involved in the orientation and the job training and school preparation. And she just basically was saying thank you for this opportunity, in that it had really changed her son's whole outlook on life, that he was now being a father to his son, that he had gotten back in school, and that she felt that he really had an overall change in his attitude, that he felt hope and was actually now pushing toward having a life that was going to be successful and was going to have some positive changes.
That's like an awesome way to end it right there. Did you guys, either one of you, have some other comments that you might want to make? One of the things that I did touch on when we were talking about the Boston ceasefire model were the pros and the cons. I mean, we talked about not really being a cookie cutter approach, but is there something specifically that you're like, oh no, that's not going to work here in Sacramento? Was there something specific to that?
I don't think there was anything that we said wouldn't work, but I know that the partnership between law enforcement and the community was a key reason why the Boston model worked for us as opposed to any other. So much mistrust, right, has gone on in communities because of the relationship or lack of relationship that we've had with law enforcement. And I think this is the first strategy that really looks at how to change that partnership and that interaction. It causes the police to no longer come in and saturate a community with enforcement to where good-willed people are now targets and offended. But this actually allows the community to take ownership of those 1% of the community that's really causing or leading a lot of the violence, and allows them to work with the police department to change how they deal with or police our communities.
Yeah, and for me, I think understanding that a gang problem or a problem in the community is not just a community problem. It's a problem for the city and all interested parties, which are law enforcement, government, and SETA, and community organizers, churches, businesses. All of them have a value in invested into this group and changing their approach to dealing with it. Law enforcement has done what they've done for many years and are can do it well. The church has done what it's done for many years. State agencies have done what they've done, but working together, we're changing the way we are all operating and targeting our efforts together and investing into kids. There's redemptive value in every one of those kids' lives. We just have to find out how to pull it out of them. And this approach, I believe, has found that by investing into them all collaboratively together.
Awesome. All right. So is there any other comments? You know, one other thing that, and I don't know if we want to like really talk about this on camera. Maybe. Of course, you had to start, and did you guys know the drivers of violence were, or did you start looking at that targeted then at that
Well,
point?
we started looking at it, you know, and that's a big piece of this program is the data analysis. You know, you got to do your homework ahead of time to see where your problems are, or else you're just doing that shotgun approach. You know, you're just going out and stopping cars, where with the data analysis, you get to find out who's causing the majority of violence. And then you can focus all of your efforts on that group, and you get more bang for your buck. You know?
So as the lead of that out there, what kind of prompted you to say, we need to get the community involved?
Well, actually, you probably heard from Shonda with ACT. They actually went to a presentation in another city, I believe it was Union City, saw what a presentation on ceasefire, said, hey, we got to be doing this in Sacramento, came back to Sacramento and invited law enforcement community, faith-based leaders, community members, and said, hey, here's this program, we want to show it, we want to do it here. And it's funny, Reverend Brown came out from the East Coast, who was directly involved in the Boston 10-Point Coalition. You know, he told the story of, you know, the same thing happened there. You get this, you know, group, 200 people show up to the meeting, everyone wants to do it, so they have another meeting, and now it's down to 100, and then it dwindles down. That same thing happened with us. You know, we started out 40 or 50 people, kind of started going down, and then we have this core group of people saying, yeah, we want to do this. And that's kind of where it took off. But ACT kind of spurred that.
So we're about ready right now.
Okay,
I was recording, but you know.
Okay, so some of that, I like that stuff too. So, going off my bullets, and you can feel free to take this however you want to. So how important was it for law enforcement and the police department in particular to be involved from the beginning in the planning of this project?
Actually, I think it's critical. And anytime you start working with the community all across the board, first off, this particular program takes a whole community to be effective. It's not just law enforcement. You know, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. You got to get everyone involved to focus on it. So that's key. And it's also the fact that we were all in there at the beginning when the technical advisors came to us and said, this is what the program is about, here's how it works. So everyone hears the same message and how the program works, and everyone gets that buy-in. Another critical thing, I think, and it's all about relationships. When you build relationships with people, you know, a lot of the faith-based leaders I'd never met before, I got to know them, you build that trust and that relationship, and you start working together better. They know where you know, law enforcement typically, you know, when people see us, what are we doing all the time? We arrest people, and we do a very good job at it. You know, this program is getting away from that traditional method. It's trying to prevent those arrests and get kids to take a different path away from violence, but we still have that arrest in there if we need to. Well, when they heard that, they loved it. You know, they had to get, you have to get that buy-off from law enforcement. Yeah, we're okay with not arresting people. We don't want to put people in prison. And then we also needed that commitment from them that if we had to go that path, that they would support us. You know, that message has to be that if the violence continues, we as a community, law enforcement and non-enforcement, will stand together and do what we have to do to stop the violence.
So, seeing how the project is somewhat prevention focused, how do you and your officers navigate that your role in the project as both law enforcement and community partners?
Yeah, actually, I see it more as an intervention suppression type program. To me, prevention is, you know, hitting them before they actually get into gangs, before they even start violence. You know, that's going down to early ages of grade school now, or junior high. But this program is one of the only ones I've ever seen that go after the drivers of violence. These are guys that have a pretty lengthy arrest history. They've not, you know, and they've worked their way up to violence, so they've been doing some violent acts for a while. So it's not a difficult concept to adjust to from law enforcement. In the call-ins, and I'm sure Shonda talked about that, it's a pretty consistent message. We all say, look, we don't want you to continue the violence. In fact, law enforcement, we know what you're doing out there. We know you're involved in it, but we really want you to get out of this lifestyle. We want you to take the services. We don't want to have to arrest you, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life. You're going to end up hurt or dead. And those are all really bad situations. So we, as a community, law enforcement, and then the community stands up and backs us up. Look, we don't want you to get arrested, but if you continue, we will put an immense amount of pressure from law enforcement to protect our community, because, you know, stray bullets can hit innocent people.
So, How does the badge affect your ability to engage not only the client, the offender, but his family and the community in the project?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. From our standpoint, we're, a lot of times we're dealing with gang members. It's not on a pleasant experience, so it's usually adversarial of sorts on the streets. We're usually contacting them, arresting them, or they're suspects. So initially, that same feeling is there. The traditional law enforcement doesn't really leave here. We're not the social workers like the case managers from SETA or the street outreach workers that build that relationship and try and help them along. We help with that message, but we're also, it's kind of that stick and carrot approach. We're kind of that stick of if you don't get out of the violence, and we're there to take care of business. But there have been occasions, and I can speak personally, that there was this one kind of a original gangster type from one of the gangs, and he was kind of included in some of the meetings that we were having of how to prevent these things from happening in the future. We never even thought he'd be involved for once. It was very pleasant to see that he was getting involved, and I had some side conversations with him. And it's funny that once you get past his persona of being a gang member, and once he got past me in the uniform, we actually had some good dialogue, and we had some some understanding, and you can see that we kind of got past that point. So you can do that, but typically probation has a little bit more of that because they have these people on their caseload. They're having an interaction all the time with them. The case managers from Sacramento Employment Training Agency, they get to know them and what they need to do to get out, what are their barriers, and the same with the street outreach workers. A lot of them have been in gangs in the past, and they know what they're going through. In fact, I know one of our street outreach workers at the Collins said, look, I wish I would have had this opportunity. I wish someone would have said, you can get out now. And he goes, I probably wouldn't have had to go to prison, and spend some time there. So it's a great opportunity, and it's credible to the participants. I can stand up there and say, hey, you need to get out of it, but I'm a law enforcement officer. I haven't lived their life. So when someone else stands up there that has been there, they get a lot more credibility.
So one other thing that the statistics are really impressive in terms of with the first initial report. Can you speak a little bit to the statistics and what that means for law enforcement in terms of the success of that?
Sure. I know in comparing a year before to a year after ceasefire started, you probably already know we started in South Sacramento, that we identified 3 areas in the city with the highest rates of violence, shootings, and the macro corridor had the highest. And then our data analysis showed that 2 primary gangs and some subsets of each gang were causing the majority of violence. And I think I mentioned earlier, there was a total of 28 shootings between these 2 gangs prior to ceasefire starting in 18 months. That's a lot. And it was getting into just a gang war. So the data analysis showed it, and then at the time I was in our Special Investigations Division, and I was running our gang unit and narcotics unit. So once the data analysis showed what gangs were involved, my gang detectives worked along with probation and our problem-oriented policing teams were able to identify who within that gang are the active drivers. You may have 250 members in a gang, but not all of them will be active. You might have 50 that are really driving it. So we had the knowledge at that time to say, okay, here's our active participants. That's who we need to call in and start addressing. So initially, at that year-end results, we dropped the shooting in that between those 2 gangs 70%, which was pretty impressive. Right along the macro corridor, we dropped at 58%. That is, the macro corridor is within our District 5 in the police department, and that dropped, I think, around 26%. And then as a comparison, citywide, we were down 16%. So you can see there's a pretty substantial decrease. And you know what? I don't think we can claim all of it, but that was the only program in that area that was starting. So I think, some credit can be given to ceasefire.
So, what's we know that you're a vocal advocate for the program. What is the police department's overall view of the project, given the numbers? Do they see it as working? And if yes, how do you extend those efforts? And if not, what are some of the challenges that need to be addressed in order for the department to see it?
Right. Well, we're still involved in the program. In fact, the reason we got into it is because Chief Brazil, wanted us involved in it. It's important to have the bosses support it, because then, as an agency, obviously we support, so he's instrumental in saying, no, we need to be involved in this. Obviously, we had some positive effect, but it takes resources also. I know we've been cut pretty substantially as an agency. Probation's been cut tremendously. As I was mentioning before, we had 2 full gang investigations teams. We had our problem-oriented policing teams, and all of those people got laid off. So part of the effort is, when you have more officers to direct resources to the program, it's very, very helpful. And it's just, a little bit more difficult for us there. Funding is another avenue that's a challenge. But most of the funding went toward data analysis, small piece, but most of it went to services and street outreach workers. And some of that funding is going away, and we as a team are, applying for different grants and stuff, and that's always a challenge also in these times. Grants aren't as much available. So that's kind of our challenges, but I think as an overall, I think, people see it as successful if you can do it right and work together and have the resources to support it. Yeah, it's a great program.
So are there I think you covered all my questions. Is there anything else that you want to add to that that maybe we missed? Or
I don't know, did you, as I'm sitting here sweating, did you, anything come up during your other interviews that needs some clarification?
No, I'm really looking for the whole, how did you get involved? What's the importance of working in the community?
I
And
did think
empowering community
yeah.
piece is huge.
I do want to bring something else up because I
Okay.
think it's an extremely important piece. Well, I think one of the things Sacramento is known for is their faith-based involvement, faith-based community. We've had a tremendous positive response with the faith-based community. And there's many reasons why that's very important. One is they're out in the community, they're out doing night walks in the areas. I know it scared me to death when they first went out there. I'm thinking, oh my God, someone's going to get hurt. But they came back with stories of, hey, we talked with not only the community saying, hey, we need to get involved, explain the program, but they were talking to some of these gang members and saying, hey, we want to pray for you. And they were very receptive to it most of the time. I mean, I found that kind of shocking at first, but I was like, this is fantastic. But it's also, they have credibility in the community. It's their community out there going to their churches that need to understand what the program's about. If you took one of the apartment complexes on Mack Road and you got the whole sustainability part, if you got them to support this program and said, okay, we're done with this. When we see an apartment that's starting to allow gang members in and causing problems, we're going to work with the community, we're going to call the police. They'd own that community. And that's how you solve your problems there. So they were able to break down those barriers. I didn't know a lot of the community out there, and I went to several community events, and it was so nice to have one of the lead pastors out there saying, I know Lieutenant Champion, he's the real deal, he supports this program, he wants your kids to get the help. That broke down those barriers for me that might have taken me months or longer to get to know them. But by having someone with that credibility say, hey, he's okay, huge for the police department. So, that relationship we built with the faith-based leadership and their involvement in this has been just tremendous.
Yay!
You know what? We want to get a few shots.
So Khalid, how did your experience with the Thug Mentality Exposed community forums prepare you to lead the mayor's gang prevention task force?
You know what those forums showed us was that there's a strong community interest, and the communities felt vested. And what we thought were just normal gang prevention programs, organizations, a lot of them outside of the box were still interested. So that brought together folks from mental health, brought together folks from the schools, law enforcement, hospitals, and they all wanted to come to these trainings that we did on the Thug Mentality. And so that showed that there was a strong community interest, strong community engagement, and a lot of those folks are still involved right now with the newly established Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force.
Tell us a little bit about some of the work that you have coming with the task force.
So yeah, we recently identified like 5 things that we want to focus on for the first year. So first one is a school-based strategy focused on literacy and after-school programming. It's called GPAL. The second one is the ceasefire effort, which we want to incorporate that into. It's been incorporated into our strategic plan, and we want to kind of solidify that effort and bring it to other parts of the city. And so another one we're doing is the Alive and Free Violence Prevention Conference. This is a conference up at Sac State. It's going to be in December. And we're targeting about 350 high schoolers to just kind of incorporate in them coping skills, knowledge base, just how do you cope with violence that's happening in your family and in your community. So it's more of a targeted, it's not just a general conference, more of a targeted conference. And another ones we're doing is the violence reduction trainings. That's actually going to be happening in about 2 or 3 weeks, where we're working with an organization out of Los Angeles to do some violence reduction training as far as gang intervention, gang awareness, history of gangs, and we're going to have a panel of reformed gang members kind of speak on their experience too. So those are a couple of the hot items right now, and then we're also looking at, of course, getting some more resources and funding to kind of do some other things in the future.
So how did the several high-profile incidents here in Sacramento escalate the efforts of the city to reduce gang violence, and especially the inter-civil?
Yeah, so if you recall, around late 2010, early 2011, we kind of had a flurry of youth homicides in Sacramento. And it kind of culminated with what became known as the barbershop shootings. So I think what happened was, from my understanding, is what I saw was that the community, once again, basically showed us certain force of unity and basically demanded from local leaders and officials that something be done. And so I think that show of force that came together on Stockton Boulevard that afternoon, that early morning, really triggered something, and the mayor felt compelled, and he was called out, and he stepped up to the plate and held several stakeholder meetings, and it was decided through those meetings that he would establish the mayor's gang prevention task force.
So what is the role of the task force? And can you give us some of the feedback from the tech team meetings and some of the things that you've been doing with the task force?
So yes, of course, there's no one size fits all, and there's no silver bullet for these kind of problems. But I think the mayor's gang prevention task force is playing a key role. One of the things first thing we try to do is get an understanding of the problem. So that's when we did the focus groups, we did informational interviews, we did discussions with youth, law enforcement, faith leaders, school officials, and from that information we put together a strategic plan. So we wanted to first understand how the community understands the problem, look at the data, and then start identifying some key strategies and some best practices that's been utilized in other cities and other places, and kind of put that into a plan. So that was the first step. Second thing was to convene all the key stakeholders and get them on board. As we know, we say it all the time, law enforcement is not going to be the solution. So we can't arrest our way out of this problem. So we had to get the community on board, and so we reached out to all the community stakeholders, and they all responded. And because it has to be a community-based solution. The gang prevention task force has this role, and so does law enforcement, but it has to be a community-based solution. So we convene. One of our roles is convening all the stakeholders, and then trying to provide some coordination and infrastructure to implement some of the key initiatives that need to be implemented on a neighborhood level. And then lastly is to hold everyone accountable. And that's including youth, parents, schools, teachers, community-based organizations that are getting the funding, and local leaders.
So how does the task force contribute or complement the ceasefire effort? I know because you know a bit about your role.
Yeah, so definitely, ceasefire actually started before the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force got established, so they were up and running. As we know, that was a grassroots, faith-based initiative, and it's been strongly, led by the faith-based community. However, when we got our plan together, we definitely incorporated it into the plan, and it's been identified as one of the key initiatives that we want to, provide support and try to look how we can expand that strategy to other parts of the city. So I've been asked recently to sit on the policy leadership team for ceasefire, and so we've started integrating some of those efforts and connecting the dots so that we can kind of leverage resources and kind of work together in trying to address this youth and gang violence issue in our neighborhoods.
So what did I miss that you want to talk
about? I think we covered most of it.
I mean, is there something like really exciting? I mean, aside from the trainings that are coming up?
Well, see, the thing is that we're really just getting off the ground.
Okay.
I mean, even though it seems like we come a long way, so to speak.
Right.
We're
From
really,
the beginning.
we're really just getting traction.
Right.
So that's the thing is that,
Do you feel like you're moving?
Yeah. I think we're moving in the right direction. We're taking slow steps, moving in the right direction, getting the plan on board. And I just got in my position as July 1st, so it's only been about 2 months. So, 2.5 months. So I think we're definitely, our trajectory is going like this. Where at first it was kind of like this, wasn't sure. We're still laying off police officers. We're still, wondering what happened with the budget. And so now we're over those humps, and it's been identified to put, to get some staffing for it.
He wants you to talk with your hands. He's taking some still shots. So
okay. And I normally talk a lot with my hands, but I wasn't doing that purposely.
Okay, then you had to take the ready.
Yeah, because when I get going with the hands, I really get going with the hands.
Okay, so that's what they want with the hands. Those are still shots with faded.
Yeah, so I think we're on the right track. We got, of course, identify some research. We have the tax measure coming up in the city of Sacramento. And that's looking to, if it passes, looking to provide some resources to the gang prevention task force. And some of the initiatives. So I think we got some good things on the burner. I think the most important thing is we have high-level leadership, we got middle leadership, and we got grassroots, community-based stakeholders all on board. So what we got to start doing now is providing overall coordination, identifying some common goals, and how we're going to measure ourselves, and then everyone working together towards those common goals. So I think we're not quite there yet, but that's where we're headed. And once we get that in place, I think, I'm pretty confident that we can have a pretty positive impact on preventing some of the gang involvement and all this violence going on in the neighborhoods.
So how is it that, you have a lot of people that are bought in that are going to be participating in the training you have coming up? You have quite a few stakeholders? Well,
we got, as far as the gang task force goes, we have, high level leadership, so the mayor chairs the meetings with on our board, and we have all the law enforcement folks. So we got the district attorney, sheriff, and all that. But we also have the school superintendents. We have community-based organizations. We have the faith leaders there, and so they kind of set the direction for the initiative. So I feel like I said, we have a pretty wide variety of folks who you normally may not consider to be gang prevention stuff, because when we think about gangs, immediately we think about enforcement, suppression, gang enhancements. We're thinking about, incarceration. And that's pretty much been the response over the last 10 years when it comes to gang strategies. So this one's kind of changing the paradigm, putting it more into prevention and early intervention. And the thing about that is going to take longer sometimes to see results. Because the ones who are caught up, sometimes they're too deep and we may not catch them, but we definitely want to catch the ones who are just at the younger stages that we can still turn around. So that's a little bit different of this strategy, is that we're trying to put more emphasis on the prevention, intervention. So some of the partners, even early childhood education. I mean, these are folks who normally you would not think as a gang prevention partner. But those are the folks, we're going to be working with in another community-based organization. Everyone's a part of this.
Awesome.
Good, okay. Now I got some.
So, Ginger, can you tell us a little bit about the call-in strategy that you use with ceasefire?
Yeah, with the call-ins, we get our referrals from SAC PD, and what it is that SAC PD identifies those that are considered drivers of violence, and so we have them come into a location that we've designated like a community center or one of those things, and they all come in. We have partners that are part of the call-in, like SAC PD, the DA, or SETA case managers, street outreach, probation, and those partners are, sitting around a table talking to the youth that come in to the call-in, and the basic message is that the violence needs to stop. Okay, during the call-in, we do go through the services that are offered to help them step away from the violence. And it's up to the young person whether they want to accept those services or not. But the message is strong. You can accept the services or not, but if you choose not to and you find yourself in trouble again, some type of gun violence or some type of crime that you've committed, those around the table, they're going to come at you with the full extent of the law.
So once the young people participate in the call-in and they accept services, then they go to your case management team, or are they referred to your case management team?
Right. Once we finish with the call-in, most of the partners leave except for the case managers and the street outreach people, and maybe a couple of other folks that are willing to help us do an assessment. We have a little mini assessment where we get their names, their address, phone numbers, their contact information so that we can follow up and call them. And we invite them to come into an orientation within the next 48 hours, come into an orientation so we can expand on the services that we can provide.
So Deshaun, can you tell me who is your typical client?
My typical client is a gang-validated driver of violence in Sacramento. Usually when they come to me, depending on the educational background, it depends on what I can do with them. I'll have people with no education. I'll have some with a high school diploma, and typically they want to work their way out of their problems. The gang and the criminal mentality that they have, the violent mentality that they have, is really hard to compete with. They're used to violence, flattery, and just being out there. Now, here I come as a case manager trying to present work readiness, education, and counseling, which they do not see as a need. That's my challenge.
So, in terms of challenges, and speaking about challenges, what has been your greatest challenge or challenges in terms of working with this particular population?
Number one, off the bat, getting them to see that education is their ticket out. Number two, getting employers to buy in that this candidate, this client is worthy of work. Those are my biggest challenges. The dreadlocks, the dreadlocks, the tattoos. How do I get a customer to say that, I'll take this guy? We're living in times where the economy's rough. This is their population. This is not their population. This is their livelihood. This is their business. Why should I take a chance on your guy? I have to get them work ready, even though they think they are, they're not. So those are some tough challenges working with this population.
Yeah, and let me just jump in real quick too on the challenges. I think one of the big challenges that we find is just trying to change that mentality.
Yeah.
Young people come in, this is something they've been doing most of their lives, gang banging and on the streets. They come from dysfunctional families a lot of the times, and a lot of them have dropped out of high school, and they're just living on the street day to day. And so trying to affect a change with these young people is really, really, really a challenge, because they don't see themselves, in any other lifestyle, So, it's just really hard to get through that, you can step away from this, you can live a different way. These gangs are in gangs, that's their family, and they feel safe and comfortable with that.
And I lose a lot of my clients after they've completed their work experience. And I think it's directly attributed to a fear of success or failure. We had a client that we paid his GED, paid for it, and when it was test time, he just didn't show up. And now he's looking at 8 years in prison. And now I talk with him, and I identified it as a fear of success and failure. If I take this test and pass, now I'm held accountable and I got to be responsible. But if I fail, hey, I'm used to failing. That's what I do. So that's my challenge, to get them to get away from that money mindset and have a productive life.
So can you tell us a success story, somebody who came to you, and please use no names, but just a young man or a young person that came to you, and how you assessed them, got them into the right services, and then how they were able to actually move on and live their life?
Yes, I do. We had a young man come to us. He was actually referred, so we actually got him in a call-in, and he had his high school diploma already, and he was very motivated. We put him in a work experience. However, he came to me and he quit. But we didn't give up on him. He said, just find me another place. We found him a work experience place at a cleaning company. He did so well that the owner not only hired him after his work experience was done, he became the supervisor of his other peers. And not only that, he had a baby, he got his own apartment, and he is now working 2 jobs and still supervising the crew in the South area.
Now, that's obviously not your typical client, but where do you see young people falling off at? Once you get them into services, is there a particular point you can identify where they fall off at, or a particular set of services that they may need that they're not receiving?
Directly when they finish their work experience hours. That's when we lose them. How many more hours do I have? None? Okay, bye. We lose them right there.
So in other words, it's about having something to transition them into from there?
And that's it. See, we usually do. When they finish their work experience, we try to get them hooked in with the educational piece or some kind of vocational training. But like I say, that fear or success kicks in and they disappear.
Junior, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say that I think in some cases they may even fall off before they finish their work experience. True, after the work experience they do fall off if they're not hired by that employer. But sometimes what happens is they're on a work experience, and certain things that they do, like they start not showing up to work and start being late and don't call in and those type of things. So they end up getting themselves fired. We've even had situations where the employer was going to hire them. They agreed to hire this person, but then all of a sudden they stopped coming to work, or they didn't show up and that type of stuff. So I think basically like Deshaun said, I think it boils down to that fear of succeeding, fear of having to really be responsible now. You know what I mean? It's just that fear. And some of the things that we do try to do, we try to refer them for different services which we have in place, such as substance abuse and mental health services and mentoring and things like that. And we can refer them, but we can't force them to go. You know what I mean? And sometimes they'll take advantage of it, but most of the times they won't take advantage of it. They don't want to do it.
And one more thing, Peggy, I can interject in there as an obstacle. During the program, we know these guys aren't going to be angels overnight, so a lot of them, even when they're in school, when they're working or in counseling, get rearrested for something because a lot of them are on probation or parole, and they can't have any police contact. But one of the other problems that we've been facing is that they've been getting rearrested.
That's so sad to hear. So we probably should have talked about this in the beginning, and Rayford, we need to edit that back to the top. So how is it that SETA got to the table in terms of the beginning of ceasefire? How was it that SETA was one of the original?
Okay. Well, SETA, first off, SETA's been involved with programs that deal with at-risk youth for a very long time. Some years ago, we were involved with the youth prevention program, and then we went into being involved in the youth challenge program, which I was part of that as well, where we dealt with youth that were coming out of the state prisons. And so also we've been partners with ACT a long time, and ACT, we've worked with them in terms of challenges with challenging youth and at-risk youth. And so ACT, they came to us and asked if we, wanted to partner with them on this whole ceasefire initiative. And ACT and SETA and Sacramento Police Department and some other partners decided, okay, we're going to go ahead and look at a ceasefire model. So they went to the Bay Area to look at the model that the ceasefire had. Look at the ceasefire model, and I believe it was Oakland. We went down there to see what Oakland's ceasefire model would look like, and just in terms of, well, is that something that we can do here in Sacramento? And so they went down there, they looked at it and decided, okay, we're going to come together on this and start planning this. What does it take? And I think basically those partners were meeting for a whole year before we even began this ceasefire model. For a whole year, just in the planning process, they had to look at the data and figure out what areas were, where the most crime was, and those type of things, and the police department provided a lot of the data, so we looked at the data to see, okay, where do we begin? Where are the hot spots in Sacramento? So it was those type of things, then building on that, we've had other people from other ceasefire initiatives come in and speak to us and just to figure this whole thing out. How do we begin? So that's basically how we began and how we got involved with ceasefire, and we knew that when we worked with other programs with the at-risk youth, that we wanted to take it a step further. There's a problem and there's a need, so we wanted to take that a step further. So we got involved with ceasefire. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the case management that you do. I mean, you provide and coordinate the overall set of services for the young person. So if you could tell us a little bit about your street outreach and also about some of your community and parental engagement strategies.
Okay, well, we set our part of it in working with these youth. We provide the employment and training services for youth. We do our one-stop career centers. You know, they come in and they can get information on all types of services out there in the community as well as our services. So that's basically our part of it. Our street outreach people, those people, they're contracted with us through the effort, and the street outreach basically go out into the community and build relationships with the community as well as with the young people that we're serving, to kind of build those relationships, to get the young people as well as the community into that mindset of change. That's basically what street outreach workers are responsible for, and some other things as well. The street outreach work with our case managers. The case managers work with the street outreach in assisting these youth, so they can kind of have a whole sort of a wraparound of services. We also refer youth out to some of our other partners, like Faith Base is involved with this as well. We have mentoring service, substance abuse service. Those are things that we can refer these young people out to if they're willing to accept services.
So I think we pretty much covered everything. Is there something that we missed that you think is important that we put in there?
You got the challenges, success.
Did we talk about the importance of the call-ins?
No.
Okay.
That was the
We talked about the points of the call-ins, what's done.
Okay, I want to just get you maybe just kind of using your hands and just talking, and I'm going to get behind you. So just act like you're...
That's that B-roll.
You're listening.
Okay.
Peggy, just kind of listen. You can just talk about anything.
Okay. So this has been...
Okay, yeah, you're going to be listening, they're going to talk. Just,
Okay.
Okay, so I want maybe showing your hands a little bit.
So it's like for editing purposes.
For editing purposes.
You're not really caring about the content.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can.
All right. So how was Ray's training? Tell me a little bit about that.
It was good.
Okay.
It was my hands was really great.
Okay.
Yeah. He brought out some points that I told him I've never heard that said in one of those type of trainings with the AOD stuff and the substance abuse. And so we had a lot of questions for him, and he's really excellent. He's able to answer very, he explains everything and just makes it easy for you to understand. And I know that his training was geared towards clinicians, and we're not clinicians, but still we deal with children or young people that are substance abusers.
So as young people, as persons that work in youth development, this was his first time doing that training. So how might we enhance that so it would make it like a good mix? Because when we go to county by county, we want. So since this project is somewhat prevention focused, as a department, probation department's representative, how do you know when to hold a hammer or hold out a helping hand?
I think it's important as a probation officer that I keep at the forefront of my mind the responsibility to utilize my authority to do what's best for the probationer. Sometimes it's not about a helping hand and it's accountability. However, whether it's a referral for a job or incarceration, I just make sure that it's what's best for the probationer or the
So was probation involved with the project from the very beginning?
Yes, probation got involved in the beginning because this population is probably not going to just respond to an all call for services. The leverage that we have to reasonably direct participants to show up and to follow up is a pretty important component to their participation, and it showed through pretty good attendance.
So how does the badge affect your ability to engage not only the probationer, but his family and the community at large?
Well, the way that it's worked in ceasefire at every level, whether it's a probationer, the family, and the community, the clients are real leery of any real close relationship with the badge. So for the purpose of being able to maintain and develop rapport for the outreach workers, the case workers, and the faith-based during the march, we kind of separate my participation and presence when they're doing those things to help them foster a rapport at those levels.
So what is probation's overall commitment to this project? Do they see it working? And if not, what are some of the challenges that need to be addressed in order for them to think that this is a successful project?
Well, probation is supportive of ceasefire. There are a lot of components that, of course, correlate with probation's position to embrace evidence-based practices. With that, the things that overlap we're going to continue to do. However, through legislation and accountability to the community, probation does have to prioritize its supervision and resources to AB 109 and some of the higher obligations.
Speaking of AB 109, are you seeing the influx of those clients participating in the call-ins, or do you have a set group of young people that you've been continuing to work with over this time?
One thing I can say about ceasefire in Sacramento is we haven't shied away from anybody. We go to incorporate the most active and the most influential gang members and those that are drivers of violence.
So I'm going to let you just talk about what you want to talk about, because I got my answers just like that.
All right, but can you just...
So do you want to talk about your participation in the call-ins?
I can talk about what my responsibility is or what I do. I don't know if somebody's going to take pretty much just everything, but don't put that on the tape. No, I'm just playing.
What were kind of some of the notes that you were writing down here? Did you talk about those?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be one question and stop, and then another question.
Okay. So do you want to do it like that? Can we do it like that?
I kind of felt like I was dragging in my la. Do you want to go through it again?
Oh, we can. I mean, it sounded good, but we can.
Especially that last question, because it seemed like...
because I started getting
let me just...
right there.
Okay. So don't get me in the film.
What I just want to get you to talk, like you say, you just...
You know, I don't want to be in the film.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm just getting the back of your head.
So what is probation's overall commitment to the
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, here we go.
Probation's overall commitment to the project.
Probation's committed to ceasefire. There are a lot of components to ceasefire that correlate with the department's pursuit of the implementation of evidence-based practices. We work with faith-based, there's referrals, there's life skills. SETA utilizes assessments, and as long as we're able to do these things without any commitment for additional resources, I think we'll be all right. However, the department is obligated under legislation and responsibility to the community to utilize its resources to supervise the high-level violent offenders and the crimes that put the community at risk in general.
Does the probation department see ceasefire as working? Don't do your face like that. Is that a trick question?
No,
Let me
say this.
Okay.
I think it's important to keep in mind what it is we look for as success. There are different components to ceasefire that are working that make it a success outside of outright numbers and statistics. There are a lot of these participants that might have to go to jail or get violated once or twice before they realize that they want to make the investment for change, and at that point they do call. With the DA, the participants being put on notice about the violence, and sometimes when participants reoffend and they're involved in violence, I know that ceasefire, their participation and them being exposed to that opportunity sometimes becomes part of the outcome of their disposition in court.
Was that good for you?
I'm tired, man.
Okay. I like the part about the evidence base, and I like the part that you said
I'm
that.
gonna shoot from up. I'm just gonna stay right there.
But you know what I like too?
Two. Hold on. 3, 2, 1. Go ahead.
In evaluating success, it's important that we understand the value system of the population that we're trying to impact. Ingrained in the fiber of gang and violence is the understanding that you don't cooperate with the police. So law enforcement presence a lot of times gets in the way of the ability of the outreach workers, the case workers, and during the night walks, because folks are leery that there's a collaboration or a relationship that's too close. So the understanding of, or the perception of success based on, what was the question again on that? I need a burger, what I need.
You know what? A burger? Okay.
I'm sorry, man. You gonna have to. When looking at the outcomes of success, it's important that we keep in mind and understand the culture of gangs and violence. To be able to do outreach and to try to embrace active gang members and drivers of violence to participate in a program where law enforcement is a key component is contrary to even their value system as far as doing anything that cooperates with law enforcement. These youngsters lack a support base at home, they lack resources, and when they wake up in the morning, going and getting a job and trying to clean up isn't at the forefront of their mind. It really takes a real effort and the ability to convey genuine interest in their welfare to get them to show up to the call-ins so that they can see and be part of the resources that are there. I'm trying to think still.
Say that again.
I said we can provide all the opportunities, but what it boils down to is the participants' desire for change. They got to be desperate for change, and when they do come to that point, like many participants do throughout the year or maybe even a year later, they're calling me asking about that opportunity they had that they didn't take serious the first time around. But there's a lot of good change, and even as a probation officer, being able to work with my clients in this and be able to offer that resource, it's priceless because it provides me with another angle to get their buy-in and for them to understand that what's most important is them, and to be able to convey to them that probation is of service to the client. And with that, for the most part, it helps in developing rapport, and it leads into a lot of other things.
That's good.
Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Positive Youth Justice Initiative and how that came about?
So the Positive Youth Justice Initiative is really looking at county-level juvenile justice systems, the way they operate. Their traditional frame is not to be promoting youth well-being, but as someone that works for a health foundation, that's what we're about, is making sure that young people who are most at risk for poor health outcomes have the opportunity to live a healthy and productive life. So Positive Youth Justice came about by blending our previous youth program, which was really about building youth development supports at the community level, with the direct investment into the highest risk youth population. For us, that's crossover youth who have been in the child welfare system but are now in the juvenile justice system. So we're taking that learned experience from a previous youth initiative and blending it with this new initiative, which is really focused on the highest risk youth populations. It's something that we knew we missed in our last youth program, the REACH youth program. It was a general youth development approach, which brought lots of young people to the table, but not those that are most at risk for the poor health outcomes. And we took a learning approach to it that said, if we need to reach those high-risk youth populations that are likely to live, poor health, in their communities, we need to be intentional about engaging those young people. So we designed a strategy, the Positive Youth Justice Initiative, which blends positive youth development with trauma-informed care, delivering those supports through wraparound service provision, culturally competent supports in the community with community-based organizations, and then also looking at the way juvenile justice systems operate. So looking at the data that they use or don't use, the tools that they use to assess and treat and support young people, and then also looking at maybe some of the systemic biases that we see for youth of color, whether they're getting access to mental health services, or they're getting access to those key supports that we know will improve outcomes in the long term.
I wanted to do that one piece about access to mental health services. You stumbled a little bit, but that's important right there. Right?
Okay.
So can you go right in?
Sure. We also looked at the operational capacity of county-level juvenile justice systems, the way they use data or not use data, the screening and assessment tools that they use for young people, and hopefully reducing the systemic biases we know young people of color are experiencing within those juvenile justice systems, meaning access to supports like mental health services, the trauma-informed care, which we're hoping to blend at the juvenile justice system level, and then really providing that treatment and support so young people can live a healthier life.
Then I want to talk a little bit about how you're, with the county level systems, how are you going to promote them working with the community-based organizations and expanding the data?
It's a really good question. We've seen model programs across the country that take not only the cross-system collaboration, but community-based support. So making sure that those non-traditional partners are at the table. We know at day one they may not be at the table. They may not be familiar with the jargon and the juvenile justice system conversations and the vocabulary, but they're important to be at the table. They'll be there because their focus, the folks that we're thinking of, the neighborhood organizations, the caring adults, the faith-based groups that are working within the communities, they're there to advocate for the well-being of young people. And they are a critical partner in the systems reform that we see at the county level. Their ideas, their advocacy, and their thoughts and leadership will really not only help systems if they're engaged early, but then help sustain whatever systems changes we see through the initiative. We see their voices as critical partners, and like I said, the space may not be there at the table right now on day one, but we have an expectation that in the next 6 to 8 months, we are going to see county systems create that space for those maybe non-traditional partners, and then include them in the dialogue of that system reform.
Can you talk a little bit about the wraparound service?
Yeah. So with Positive Youth Justice Initiative, it's really about blending those youth development supports around improving educational outcomes, making sure that young people who are in the juvenile justice system have more access to the workforce and workforce preparedness. That health piece is so important. We know that young people who are in the juvenile justice system might be struggling with addiction or other issues that may affect their health outcomes, mental health challenges. So those supports will be critical to ensuring that young people have an opportunity to write their path. Once they're engaged in the juvenile justice system, we know these youth development supports can help influence their path to a healthy, productive life. We know all young people need those supports, and what's important is the youth that are in the juvenile justice system now have an opportunity through Positive Youth Justice Initiative to have access to those critical supports which promote youth health and well-being. Another piece for us that's critical is the cross-system collaboration. We've heard as we've visited communities that public systems may have collaborated in the past, but we want a more intentional design in that collaboration and the inclusion and actually intentional invitation to community-based organizations that are working in the neighborhoods where these young people are coming from. Those faces, those individuals, those adult supports will be there long after those systems are out of their life. So how do we help promote those healthy relationships with those partners in the community? That's another critical piece for Positive Youth Justice Initiative. And one thing that we're really trying to do is model what we're promoting, at the community level. So within the Positive Youth Justice Initiative, it's the Sierra Health Foundation's initiative, but we're partnering with the California Endowment and the California Wellness Foundation in helping support communities implement the Positive Youth Justice Initiative. Philanthropy has to walk the talk, and we're trying to do that within this initiative as well.
Rayford, was that funky with that in the background?
Oh, because there was another one.